Hi, my name is Brendan Lee. Today I'm going to be talking to you about daily reviews. Daily reviews is one of those things which many educators and organisations have been talking about, but there is still a little bit of confusion around how to actually implement them effectively, so that it supports student learning. So the three things that I'm going to go over are: firstly, why do we need to do daily reviews? What is a daily review? And then how can we implement daily reviews? So why do we need to do a daily review? Because we experience this problem. Students don't retain what they've been taught. It's one of the most common problems that I've come across, where we have, all of this great teaching, and it's so common where you're a teacher, and you start to think, well, did the teacher the previous year actually teach these kids anything? Because it seems like they've forgotten everything. And so, how do we get on top of this problem of students not retaining what they've been taught? So instead of this teaching and moving on, we want to be doing what's called daily reviews. So teaching and moving on, that kind of um, traditional way of teaching, where we teach something, and then we'll feel like we've taught it, but then sooner or later, whether it's through an assessment or an exam, um, we find out very quickly that our students have forgotten everything that we taught. And so a lot of this comes back to Herman Ebbinghauser's research on memory, and what has now been labeled as the forgetting curve. And so the forgetting curve, it basically, what Herman Ebbinghaus done was, he done a bit of research on himself, where he gave himself a list of pseudo words or nonsense words, and wanted to see how many he would actually remember over a set period of time. And so he taught himself this set of words, and then over time, as you can see in the diagram there, he started to forget. And basically, as soon as he learnt it, he started to forget things. So, within one day, he started to lose about 50% of what he had learnt, and then over 6 days, it was pretty much everything. And so, one of the key principles to understand about how learning happens is the fact that learning is not the same as performance. So, performance is what we kind of look at as what the students are doing in the here and the now. So if you look at this image here of the child kicking the ball, so that child can perform, they're able to do it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they've learnt it to mastery. And the same thing can apply in the classroom, where we can have students doing different activities. So whether that's them showing us what they can do by answering questions on a worksheet, or verbally responding, and they might be able to give us the right answers, but sometimes what they're responding with is knowledge which is based on the recency in time of them having learnt it. Okay, so you literally might have taught it, 1 minute ago, and so it's still within their short-term memory, and they're able to recall it quite easily. It might have been after you've done some core responses, and so they have it ingrained um, in their repertoire of knowing what they should be saying, but they're not really thinking about what they're saying. Another one could be that you've got it heavily scaffolded, so they can probably literally see it up on the board in front of them, and they're not actually being forced to engage with their own understanding and knowledge from their long term memory. So, learning is not the same as performance. So, if we go by Kirshner, Swaller, and Clark's kind of definition of learning being a change in long term memory, then really we can't assess whether learning has occurred until 2 or 3 weeks down the track. So what we are seeing in front of us is performance. Okay, sometimes that might just be them mimicking what they have just seen. It might be things that are just in their short-term memory. It might be things that they are just copying from other students around them. And so there is definitely a need for performance. Like if students aren't able to show us that they can do things in the here and the now, well, then they're definitely not going to be able to learn it in the future. If they can't do it now, they're not going to be able to do it in the future. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they have learned if they can do it now. Okay, so things like formative assessment, checking for understanding, and exit tickets, they're still really important. But that's just us seeing if they have got it at all. Okay, and if they can recall it in that short term sort of time period. So looking a bit deeper at Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve. So over after 1 hour, um, they can have forgotten up to 50% of things. after one day, up to 70%. And for those of you with students and with children yourselves, you'll know that, when you ask them a question like, what did you learn today at the end of the day? So often you get the response like, oh, I've forgotten, or I don't know. And sometimes they're not just being lazy, but they've literally forgotten, because what Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve is telling us is that if they have learnt all of this new information, then they're highly unlikely to be able to remember all of that new bits of information, because we start to forget it basically as soon as we've learnt it. And so, just one kind of thing to point highlight here is that this is different for every single student. Okay, and so what we have, the ways that we're able to make connections within our existing schema is going to be different for every single person. And so we can't like say with 100% accuracy that 50% of the content that I've taught today will be forgotten after 1 hour, because um, every student is at a different level, different stage of their learning. So some of them are right at that kind of novice stage, that acquisition phase of learning, while other students, they might be closer to fluency or generalization. And so they're able to make stronger, more connections to the different concepts that are being taught. So that's just a kind of, a key point just to think about and to understand that this is just a generalization, these percentages. It doesn't mean it happens for every single student. And so, how can we kind of get on top of this forgetting curve? By doing what we call retrieval practice or space practice. And so, in this image here, what it's actually showing us is that if we review something, or we get our students to recall it within one day, then there is every time that they're forced to retrieve something, their memory strengthens. So their existing schemas strengthen on that concept. So another researcher, Graham Nuttall, he done a really interesting bit of research, and you can read about it in his book, The Hidden Lives of Learners, where he had researchers in classrooms and taking videos, and they looked at what the students were doing during lessons. So not just what the teacher was doing, but what the students were doing. What were they thinking? What were they talking about? What were they learning? So he performed this study. One of the things he found was that if students are able to engage with new concepts at least 3 times, they're more likely to have that move into their long-term memory so that they can access it later. So another key point to understand, and this principle is a slight play on words to a phrase that many of you would be familiar with. So instead of practice makes perfect, it's practice makes permanent. And the reason why we want to change the phrasing in this is because if you're practicing the wrong way of doing things, or the misconceptions, that's what you're going to make permanent. So we want to make sure that we've taught them right first, and so that they're actually practicing the right way of doing things, and that is what actually becomes permanent. We don't want to be having them practice things when they haven't learnt it right the first time. So we've got to teach them well the first time, and then when we're doing our retrieval practice, our daily reviews, the practice is what makes it permanent, but they're practicing the right thing. So next up, I'm going to talk about like what is a daily review. So I've gone around, what the importance of it, but now, what is a daily review? So for me, and just to kind of clarify, again, there are a lot of different people and organisations that talk about daily reviews. These are the key principles that I believe should be in a daily review, but that means that if you go to someone else, they might believe other things. So the first one here is retrieval practice, and I've already spoken about it a few times today. But what I mean by retrieval practice is that we want retrieval practice to be having the learner be the one that is doing the heavy lifting, and they are pulling information out of their heads. Okay, so it is not a time for giving new information. It is a time for them to be recalling and pulling it out of their heads, that new information. I'll let you read this quote here from Kate Jones. So Kate has a number of books on retrieval practice. Again, I highly recommend them. And in this quote here, she's just again talking about the fact that every single time that you recall a bit of information, it just strengthens that existing schema. So that's what we want. We want stronger schema because then it's less likely that it will be forgotten in the long term. The second point here is what we call spaced practice. So this refers to when how much time has been between when you first learnt the concept and when it was recalled. And so before in that diagram, we saw how if we get them to recall it, one day and then a couple of days after that, and then, a few days after that again, each time that we increase that space in time, it just makes it that little bit more difficult for the learners to remember. And that's actually what we want. We want them to start to forget things. So one of the negatives I've seen with this is around how what we can see is teachers actually having too many um, too many scaffolds and having things which are in our daily reviews every single day, and so never actually giving our students an opportunity to forget things because they've just got it in there every single day. Right. So the next point here is around how we're not good at picking effective study habits. Okay. So how this relates back to space practice is that we would rather cram for it. We'd rather cram for exams. We'd rather do things like highlighting, rereading, and all of this stuff is actually not effective for long-term gains in performance. And so cramming can definitely help us short-term. And if you recall back to your times of studying for exams and maybe you cram for your HSC or a university exam, and that might have really helped you for that actual exam. I guarantee you that you've probably forgotten the majority of that information that you crammed into your short term memory. And the other thing as well that feels good is things like highlighting and rereading, and it feels good because of that familiarity. So we feel like we're learning, we feel like we're going over things because we are going over it, but we're not actually forcing ourselves to think hard enough um, to make those new bits of information become ingrained in our long term memory. So space practice. So rather than the traditional way of doing that massed practice or that cramming, space practice is where we increase the amount of time between when we first learnt it and to when we recall it each time. And so each time we want to be aiming to increase the amount of time in between the initial or the last time students had to recall it. So this third principle is one which a lot of teachers struggle to get their heads around, like exactly what it is. So interleaved practice. So interleaved practice is when you're getting students to look at similar looking problems that can't be solved with the same strategy. And so what you can see here in this graphic is how we've got the same triangle, and what we want our students to do is to be able to pick the right strategy to use for each of the problems that are presented there. And so this is what we're doing after we have taught our students, the concepts. Then we want to see if they can apply it. So can they apply it and you use the right strategy for the right problem? Here's another example. So this is now an example of a similar worded word problem, and students need to be able to work out what they need to do. So what we have here is we have the top one being an addition problem and the second one being a subtraction problem. And then the last principle to follow is around what we call desirable difficulties. So this refers to how there's like a sweet spot. There's a sweet spot that we want to be presenting our students with different questions that force them to think so that they've got to recall things that we're kind of on the cusp of them forgetting, and that level of difficulty which ensures it's hard enough so that it's not doesn't feel like easy and that they're getting bored with it, but it's not too hard that they can't do it. So that's what desirable difficulties are. So it's that sweet spot, and again, it's going to be different for every student. But what we can start to do is we can just start to organize how we present our learning and how we present the questions that our learners have to think about, and then constantly checking for understanding so that we can be responsive to where our students are at, and not having those scaffolded questions up for too long. So what do we want to cover in a daily review? So you need to, in an ideal world, our students remember absolutely everything that we teach them, in an ideal world, but we don't have enough time for that, and it's also not really a valuable use of our time either if we're just constantly going over previously learnt concepts, and not all of that information needs to be able to be recalled quickly and efficiently and effectively all the time. And so we need to just prioritize those concepts that students need to be fluent in. And so when we're looking at mathematics, it's going to be things like your basic maths facts, so multiplication, division, subtraction, addition. Being fluent in this stuff ensures that when we do move on to those more complex problem-solving activities, that their working memory is not being taken up with just thinking about, what's 4 times 5. If that's where their heads are at, then their working memory is going to be drained. That they're going to have that extraneous load put on what should be a simple task for them. So if we can get that fluent, their working memory can then be focused on what the problem is actually asking them to do. And likewise for number sense, so if they haven't got number sense before basic maths facts, then that's what we want to be focusing on first. But again, yeah, like if they haven't got that number sense, then they're really going to struggle with those more complex tasks later on in maths. Third one there is around vocabulary and concepts. So this can just be getting them to, record definitions or, reasons or, big ideas around different concepts. The fourth one there is mental maths and maths that they can do in their heads. The next one is the current topic. So we want to kind of keep that fresh again, like that space practice idea of making sure that we're providing practice opportunities for our students. And then that last one there is word problems. Like it's one of those things where you wouldn't put like a whole heap of word problems because it's going to be too time consuming, but you might put, one or two word problems because our students just need to be engaging with more of them. So the other thing that you can also include here is that prerequisite knowledge. So by including it within the daily review, firstly, it provides an opportunity to activate prior knowledge. We can check for understanding and see if anything needs to be retaught. And so this is also the time where like you might quickly work out actually my planned lesson, I'm not going to be able to go forward with it because they haven't got the prerequisite knowledge. I'm going to have to put a pause on that and let's actually teach them what they need to know to engage with this lesson. So lastly, how can we implement daily reviews? So it's all well and good to know what it is, but practically, like, what do we want to be doing? So the first thing is, um, you know, the more retrieval practice our students are doing, the less likely they're going to forget things. So we want to be aiming to complete daily reviews on most days, if not every day, especially every lesson that you're teaching maths. It should go for around 10 to 20 minutes. Like we've also got to be mindful like how much time we actually have within our maths lesson. So yeah, 10 to 20 minutes, I've found it seems to be, like the best kind of that sweet spot of not being too long, not being too short, giving them enough opportunities to recall what they need to recall, but not going so long that they get bored with it as well. So I would focus on having daily reviews as being the time where you're not teaching new content. If you're finding that you've got like 80+ % of your students not being able to answer a question, I would probably, make note of that and add that as, something that you need to teach in a later lesson rather than stopping then and there. You want your daily review to be quite quick and snappy, have a bit of a flow to it. So you've got like quick responses, you're using your mini whiteboards, lots of core responses. You might throw in some turn and talks there, a bit of cold calling, all of these different like really effective teaching strategies so that you're getting all of your students thinking and you're checking their thinking along the way as well. You might even include a weekly review grid that you might complete once a week. So it could look a bit like that, the 4 quadrants that I've got in that image there, where you could divide that up into last lesson, last week, last month, and last year. And again, this can just be a way of breaking things up. And I've also found that teachers, they really appreciate this sort of thing because one of the kickbacks on daily reviews and using so much with the mini whiteboards is that they don't have any evidence of learning or like where their students are at. And so this could also just be in like a weekly book that students are using. So say for example, like every Friday, they pull out their book, they split it up into 4 quadrants, and then they answer the question. So you might have like 3 questions from last lesson, a couple of questions from last week, one question from last month, 2 questions from last year, and then they've just got to complete that in the 4 quadrants. You could still have that on your whiteboard, and you might even divide that up into four quadrants on the whiteboards. But yeah, it's just another way of mixing it up, and I'll show you some other ways in a moment as well. So overall, you want you want to aim to have your daily review being really efficient to set up. And so if you're finding like this is taking you an hour to put together, then that's not what I would label as being efficient, And you can even take shortcuts like literally just pull out if you're using slides, like pull out questions from slides that you've already used. There's no reason why you can't reuse them. Firstly, what we know about memory is that even if you use the exact same question, the chances of your students remembering that question and the answer to that question are pretty slim. However, if you do want to push it, just change some of the digits or change how it's laid out slightly. But yeah, easy way to increase the efficiency of the setup is to use slides or questions that you've already asked before. You also want it to be efficient to complete. Again, like going back to that point of having it being quick and snappy and making sure that you're not going past that 10-20 minute time period. You want it to be quick to complete. If you're throwing in too many multi-step word problems, that's going to really slow down the pace of this section of it. And again, coming back to trying to prioritize things that you want to be fluent in. If you haven't got enough time to cover like enough different concepts and questions, then you're probably including too many complex ideas. And then you want it to be efficient to check and give feedback. So again, coming back to that idea of if you've got like multi-step problems, too many multi-step problems, it's going to be really hard for you to check and give feedback if you're looking at it, a whiteboard or a piece of paper full of different ideas or different strategies. And so make it quick to check and give feedback. So you can even use things like thumbs up and thumbs down. You might use multiple choice questions. As I said before, using those mini whiteboards and having really tight routines around how you use those mini whiteboards, how they're handed out, how they're using them, like writing on them, how they're fixing them up, all those different things. You've got to teach those routines to make this efficient. So there are a number of different organizations which have some really great questions that you could call upon. Things like diagnosticquestions.com from Craig Barton. He's got a great podcast and website, and he's written a number of books as well. And the beauty of this website, Diagnostic Questions, is not just that it gives you a number of multiple choice questions that you can use, but also the fact that the wrong answers are actually based on common misconceptions as well. So and that's where the diagnostic part of it comes into it. Another thing that you could use is what has been labeled as a retrieval practice challenge grid. And so you might have 3 points being for things from last unit of work. You might have 2 points for something that they've got to do from last week, and then 1 point for things that are based on your current topic. And so whatever you choose to do, however you choose to set it out, this is, again, just another way for you to mix up your daily reviews. And so it doesn't just have to be slides. There's a number of different ways that you can do it. You could also have a retrieval practice placemat. And so as you can see here, the questions on this or the activities that they've got to do, they're not just focused on mathematics. This sort of placemat could be used for any subject. And then the next one here, a lot of you might be familiar with this. This is from Australia. This is oka.org.au or Oka Education. The UK also has a very similar organisation, Oak Academy. And so both of these are free resources from not-for-profit organisations, and they have developed a number of resources that do include daily review slides, and they're ready to go for you. And the development of those slides the developers have used a lot of the same concepts that I've spoken about today. So definitely highly recommend that you have a look at that so that you're not reinventing the wheel and you're saving yourself a lot of time there. So now here are some common mistakes that I've seen teachers use when it comes to doing daily reviews. So the first one here is having that illusion of mastery. Okay, so what this is referring to is how we give ourselves a pat on the back for thinking that we've taught our students to mastery. They've got these concepts really well, but sometimes we get actually have an illusion of mastery because we have kept the scaffolding up too high, too long. And so that's what this is an example of, where you might have a slide like this where you know you're getting them to skip count by fours, but by having that scaffold there, that image, they're able to actually just read it, and they don't actually have to be forced to recall it themselves because they're just following along with the red circles there. So that would be the illusion of mastery, where we think learning has happened, but we haven't actually given our students an opportunity to show us what they can do independently. And so, yeah, we think learning has happened when we don't actually know yet. So, yeah, the non-example part of this is that we keep the scaffolding up too long. And so, yeah, whether it's like that, whether it's even as a teacher providing verbal prompts when our students don't necessarily need it. So, when it comes to that daily review, if you're following that principle, it should all be retrieval practice, then they should have engaged with it at some stage before. And so, you shouldn't have to provide scaffolding any longer. Here's another non-example where the teacher stands up the front and they say, look, remember, this is what we done yesterday. So the teacher's doing the heavy lifting, the students aren't. Next one is when the routine becomes too routine. So this comes back to that point before around sometimes we leave things up for too long. And so what we want to be actually doing is changing the amount of scaffolding or the complexity of the questions if we're finding that our students, they're just going through the motions. It's like in this image here where you're just in the car and all of a sudden you arrive back home and you forget how you got there because the routine is just too routine and you're not being forced to think. And another non-example is when you're using pre-developed slides, but you haven't actually checked the suitability of them. So have all of the concepts been taught? Have the slides, the way that they're presented, um, have they been presented by you as a teacher in a similar way? Or are their students going to be stuck just on the way it's presented? Now, it's not a bad thing for our students to be exposed to different ways that information is presented, but you just need to be aware of that as a teacher. Are there too many slides? Are there not enough slides? Are there, too many questions the same? Are there too many that are different? Just really important, like any time that you use pre-developed resources, that as a teacher, you've gone through it beforehand and you're not just opening up for the first time in front of the students. So here, I just want you to have a think about like do a bit of a comparison. So here we've got same very similar concept. What would you use when and where? Okay, so you can see that one on the left, you're going to use that at the start of that acquisition phase of learning, where we're just trying to build up that fluency. Whereas that one on the right there is what we might use when they are fluent, and now we just want to actually get them to recall it from their long-term memory without the scaffolding and prompting. Same thing here again. We've now got that visual prompt, that visual level of scaffolding with the representations in the tens frame, just allows them to complete that problem. Whereas in that second one there, we haven't got that visual prompt anymore. Same thing again here, where you could either get them to answer the question using making their own bar model, or we could provide that bar model and then they've got to use that as a scaffold. So here's just an overview of the different ideas that I've gone over today. So I've gone over the principles to follow for daily reviews, and then that it needs to be efficient to set up, complete, check, and give feedback. So that's it from me for today. So thank you for engaging in my presentation on daily reviews. Feel free to connect with me either over social media or email. And make sure you check out my podcast, the Knowledge for Teachers podcast. I've had a number of great conversations with people within mathematics, both at the research level and teacher level. So people like David Morkunis, Karen Zanatopoulos, and recently Corey Peltier. A few, yeah, really, also Bruno Reddy as well. Don't want to forget him. Yeah, some people who are highly knowledgeable in mathematics. So highly recommend that you give those episodes a listen. And yeah, hopefully you're able to get something out of today's presentation. Thank you.